bring out a high availability DR solution. But now we can also scale out the data tier horizontally with something called sharding. I'll talk a little bit about that. And then the final component is to make it a lot easier to deploy solutions into the cloud. We have a cloud deployment tool, and we're doing a lot to build out the cloud integration capabilities. I won't talk too much about those. You'll probably hear more about those in the next few months and coming up to Global Summit. So Iris really is the combination of these aspects, these facets brought together into a single platform. So the idea behind HTAP, which is a hybrid transactional analytical processing, this is a term now that's being used quite widely, and it's really this idea that a single platform to manage operational transactional activity at the same time, on the same data sets, on the same platforms, without the need to sideload data into a separate platform, into a different structure. So, for example, typically, if you sort of come from the relational world and the big relational vendors, then the current way in which most of those go about solving HTAP workloads is to have a row-based view of the world in the typical relational database to satisfy the transactional requirements, and then they sideload data into a columnar view to satisfy the analytical requirements. So you've got this data sideload that's going on at the same time. It's generally not synchronous. It's generally asynchronous. There may be a significant lag, and certainly you're getting a significant additional usage of hardware. You're getting a significant additional impact on the applications you have to write because you're getting the duplication of data. And then if you take that one stage further into some cloud native, then you start seeing very large pipelines being built up, moving data from store to store to store for different purposes, and that suits the cloud native architecture quite well. However, what it means is that you're duplicating data in a number of different places each for quite atomic unit purposes, and that significantly adds to the cost. So the idea of having a platform that can manage your HTAP needs in a single instance with data in a single place leads you to a much more economical way of constructing and deploying applications. So obviously, what we retain and build on with InterSystems Iris the features that you'll hopefully know and love. The idea that we're maintaining in-memory performance with built-in durability. Now, what does this actually mean? Well, I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, but the idea is that it's a transaction safe environment. In reality, what that means is the transaction's committed in the time it wrote, or the transaction's safe in the time it takes to get the transaction log written away, which physically within an Iris environment is typically less than 20 microseconds using non-volatile memory. Flash storage, basically, assuming you're not having spinning rust as your persistence level. And the fact is that, again, if you're using a more traditional relation approach, being able to write a transaction away securely within 20 microseconds is a severe challenge. And then also, if you're having to then sideload the data into a different format to simultaneously serve different workloads, then that just makes the problem even bigger. Obviously, we've got the interoperability capabilities within InterSystems Iris that came from the Ensemble world, service-based integration, and increasingly microservice-based integration. Getting a bit of a shout out to Global Summit, come along to that. There's certainly going to be some sessions on microservices and deploying microservice architectures out there. Orchestration, end-to-end monitoring, single development environment, we're all familiar with that. One feature that's within InterSystems Iris, which might be interesting, that some of you may not be familiar with, is the work that we've done within our JDBC driver. Now, at the moment, within Cache and Ensemble, the JDBC driver talks to the Cache and Ensemble engines using TCP/IP. Your application does a call into JDBC, goes over to TCP/IP stack, that then talks to Cache and Ensemble layer. With InterSystems Iris, if the JDBC driver is located on the same physical machine as the Iris instance, then your Java application talks to JDBC, and the JDBC will use shared memory to talk to InterSystems Iris. What that means is that if you're doing transactional interactions with the Iris engine, your time spent navigating the TCP/IP stacks disappears, and therefore your throughput increases significantly. Obviously, if you're doing longer running SQL interactions, SQL queries, whatever, then most of your time is still going to be spent in the SQL interaction. But if you're doing short life transactions, then this can save a significant amount of time, boost throughput dramatically, and we see that particularly when we're doing high performance data consumption activity. So the Gaia project is actually an example of that, where we're bringing in data very rapidly, consuming it into an Iris node and in a structured format in which we can work with immediately. Okay, analytics. We talked about the transactional side of things a little bit. Let's talk about open analytics. So this is all about combining the ability to work with big data analytics frameworks that are out there in the marketplace, build business intelligence, being able to run predictive analytical models. So this is coming from the machine learning space. The AI infrastructures that are out there are all about building predictive models of various different types. And what we have with InterSystems Iris is the ability to consume those and run them close to the data, and combine that with information that we pull out of unstructured data, so text-based analytics as well. So we're bringing together a much more heterogeneous analytical framework. Scalability, I talked a little bit about this. So we've got the vertical parallelization, so we're running across many cores in a single instance, horizontally scaling application workload at the user level, and now with horizontally distributing data through partition cache. And particularly, so this concept called sharding. Everybody familiar with sharding? Anybody not heard of what sharding is? Okay, so sharding is basically, so we have you have a number of Iris nodes, a number of Iris instances, and basically we're saying we've got a big table, and we're going to partition this key range onto one node, A to C on one node, D to F on another node, G to I on another node, that sort of thing. And then we can distribute query workloads across the different nodes in parallel. John's laughing there. That was a great description, obviously. Well, in a way, absolutely, but it's a little more sophisticated than that, because what happens is you can drop the query into what's called a shard master, and will automatically distribute the workload across that. We're also doing work to in 19.1 there's some work to also distribute not just SQL workloads across a sharded environment, but also to build out the object implementation across that as well. So we have a single object registry sitting on the shard master that's shared across the individual shards, so they have a common registry. And we're also going to be taking that further and then being able to do object dispatch across the shards to the correct instances. So that's something that's coming next year. So we're building out not just our SQL capabilities and subscript level mapping, but also we're building out the object infrastructure to sit over this sharded workload. And obviously, InterSystems Iris includes things like new multi-model capabilities, for example, DocDB. Anybody not aware of the DocDB stuff? So this is a document database implementation that sits on top of the object implementation. So manipulating documents, well, XML documents, JSON documents, other types of documents, as a document having document operators. So that's all going to work nicely in this distributed environment. And ultimately, what it allows us to do is to, well, this is an example of a shard masters distributing workload across different shards. As well as everything going through the shard master, one of the big problems with a sharded environment is where you need what's called co-sharded joins. So co-sharded join is where not all the data to satisfy a join is on a particular shard. For example, you might be joining a big table with a number of small tables, and those small tables might not be replicated across each shard. Or traditionally, the way to solve the problem is to replicate all the small tables across each shard. Well, what we do with Iris is to put all those smaller tables on the shard master and then use ECP to silently move blocks around as necessary to satisfy co-sharded joins. It makes implementing co-sharded joins a lot simpler, a lot easier, a lot more effective. And we do a number of other things as well to make, fundamentally, to make those co-sharded queries a lot faster. So we gain a lot of performance over other implementations. And in fact, we can build out this distributed architecture significantly. So you might have a shard master there, you'd have your shard, we might have an application tier across the top, talking CCP. We can also introduce other nodes into this architecture as well. So along with the shards, which are managing the actual data elements, we might associate other nodes for InterSystems Iris, which, for example, could be query nodes. So if you have a situation where you're consuming large amounts of data into shards, then one of the typical problems where you're consuming fast-moving data, so for example, pricing feeds or feeds coming down from a satellite, is that those data updates might flood your cache. So they'll push out of memory the blocks that you might need to satisfy the normal sorts of read activity that you might want to be doing. So what we can do is we can associate query nodes with the shards, for example. And those query nodes maintain the cache whilst you're loading in large quantities of fast-moving data into the shard. So we can mix and match Iris nodes in a much more distributed manner than before, in order to satisfy the different types of workload that you might experience. So this really is bringing this idea of a flexible HTAP architecture to life. And we've got some examples of that. I talked about Apache Spark. Well, I talked about plugging into big data analytical frameworks, and the one that we're plugging into that's most commonly used out there is this thing called Apache Spark. Who's heard of Apache Spark before? A few people. So Apache Spark is an open source framework for basically managing large quantities of data and doing interesting things with that. So quite often, for example, people might implement Hadoop as the data storage mechanism underneath Apache Spark. And what we're doing with putting Iris underneath Apache Spark is that we can, with our Spark connector, which is highly optimized in terms of it understands where data lies in each of the Iris nodes. Instead of having to load lots of data to satisfy a query up into the top level of the stack to satisfy Spark operations, we can do what's called predicate pushdown. So Spark, using our intelligent Spark adapter, can push the query operations down to the correct Iris nodes, and therefore we can satisfy queries or analytical activity much more rapidly than you can, for example, with Hadoop underneath a Spark infrastructure. So it's aware of what the shards are, it's aware of what data is at the shards, it will read data directly from the shards. Obviously, we've still got the older sort of business intelligence capabilities within InterSystems Iris that we've had within Cache Ensemble for some time. Something that's worth mentioning is we're putting quite a lot of sort of some effort into building out integration with tools that, such as Tableau, for example. So we're starting to see capabilities exist in that area, or coming along in that area, which are over and above just the normal sort of JDBC or ODBC layer. So we'll see more of that coming out next year as well. I talked about predictive analytics. So obviously, one of the things that you might do within the Spark framework is run the AI/machine learning models in R or whatever other some modeling tool that you might like. And what that does is it'll analyze the data, it'll help you develop a predictive model that suits the needs. What we can then do is take the predictive model out of that analytical framework, export it as PMR, import it into InterSystems Iris, and then run that as part of your transactional system, as part of your operational system, close to the data as transactions are flowing through. So you don't have to be sucking data out of Iris and loading it into your AI framework as a sideways operation. Again, you don't have to replicate the data elsewhere to apply AI and predictive modeling to your operational systems. Loading the PMML into InterSystems Iris and being able to run it in that way makes it simpler, easier, faster to deploy those sorts of solutions. The last thing I was going to talk about a little bit was UEMA. Again, it's another buzzword. It's comes out of the same sort of stable as Apache Spark, and basically it's all about a pipeline of activity for processing unstructured data. So solving an NLP problem. So obviously within InterSystems Iris, we're building on the capabilities again of Cache Ensemble to pull facts out of unstructured data. We can do the analysis, we can generate those facts, and then we can feed them into a UEMA pipeline that's either pre-processing or doing a number of downstream activities. There's lots of components out there in the outside world, above and beyond what InterSystems supply for working with NLP problems. So what we're doing is giving you the ability to plug into that external component framework by being able to surface data into a UEMA pipeline like this. Okay, let's start talking about a couple of the examples I alluded to earlier in terms of benchmarks that people have done. So the first one here, this is a bank that have been using, well, they were originally using Cache for a significant period of time. They've replaced that. Well, they originally replaced their in-house system with Cache, and they're now looking to, well, in fact, they're now in the process of moving to InterSystems Iris. They've done some benchmarking, and interestingly enough, what we're seeing is some quite stunning improvements in throughput. So we're looking at, again, moving to cheaper hardware than they're currently deployed on. Depending on the workload that they're looking at, 3 to 5 times improvement in throughput and 10 times improvement in ingestion performance. So this is bringing in external data, bringing in fast-moving data, taking advantage of the JDBC capabilities, for example, that I talked about. And we do other things on the Java side within InterSystems Iris, so being able to consume Java classes very rapidly. I haven't talked about those at all, but there's a number of features there which, again, make it simpler and faster to ingest data. There's another benchmark that's been done quite recently. This is a different bank. They run, basically they manage, make markets in 18,000 different indexes. So they're a big market maker in terms of, it's like the FTSE 100 is an index. So there's lots of different specific indexes that people can choose to invest in, and this bank runs a large quantity of those indexes in different markets in different periods for different investment purposes. So they need to do analytics on these indexes as the markets are moving, and typically they've had problems running those analytics across large amounts of data. And again, so they're looking at refreshing their platform because they have a near-time platform, they have a mid-time platform, and they have a long-term data warehouse at the back end of it at the moment. So they were looking at InterSystems Iris versus some other alternatives. And the initial thing that I think that stands out from this is the amount of data that we could get into the different platforms. So in Iris, we managed to load 135 days worth of data. And why is it 135 days worth of data? Well, that's all they had available. The rest of the data, this was out of their operational database and their near-time database, and they couldn't get the data out of their data warehouse. And then sort of well, it was going to take like months almost to get the data out of their data warehouse, so they gave up on that. The other products were really just taking a subset of the data out of those two data stores, so 14 days, 21 days of data. And if we look at the actual average time per query, then there's some fantastic differences in terms of its number of milliseconds per query, and the amount of hardware resources. Well, we see that Iris is consuming significantly less hardware resources. I'll talk a little bit more about the detail of the amount of hardware the column store database required in a minute. And then, but finally, this final row talking about no failures from failures. This is in terms of how, whether the query's timed out. If they're just taking too long to run to be usable in the query tools that were being used to execute those queries. So the column store and InterSystems Iris managed to return the queries in a practical time all the time. The in-memory and relational database products failed on occasion, and generally when the workloads got higher or when the database got higher. So if we look at a bit more about the actual hardware, so we're looking at 4 VMs, 8 cores, versus 8 VMs of 16 cores, or 8 VMs of 16 cores, or 3 dedicated servers. So each with 24 cores, so 3 times 24 is 72 cores, and large amounts of storage in this case. So we can see that InterSystems Iris, for running much more data, much more effectively, consumes far less hardware resources. And if we sort of graph some of the numbers, then in terms of the number of days data, obviously Iris is the blue line. That's nice. We're nice and happy with that. Start to look at actual transactional throughput and the various test loads that we do. So they start modeling a number of different query sizes. So the initial test was with a query returning 19 rows. The blue line is Iris along the bottom. The orange line is the initial in-memory database. Then we had the relational database, and then we had the columnar database. Where this drops off, where the data stops, that's because we couldn't get any results out of that database product with a greater number of concurrent queries. So it physically didn't stop responding. So look at the next one. Well, okay, we moved from 19 rows up to 210 rows. Similar pattern. Again, InterSystems Iris is pretty much staying flat along the bottom. Query time across the top here. So looking now, remember these numbers are done. These numbers are coming out of an independent third party who replicated this benchmark which the major investment bank undertook. So if I was to sort of try and summarize what InterSystems Iris gives you, it's all about being able to take action on information better. It's all about making more intelligent decisions. It's all about making them faster, using systems that are easier to build, easier to evolve. And in terms of the white papers that I talked about, the benchmark, the performance one is ESG Labs. There is another one that we did about neurolytics. This talks about low code and being able to build applications more quickly using less lines of code. Both white papers are down here at the front if you'd like to take a copy of them. And that's me done. Any questions? Dumbstruck. Peter.
John, what's the position of cache, the future of cache? If you're developing DeepSee, will it diverge? Will DeepSee, for example, diverge on Iris compared with cache, or will the code be the same?
I think you can safely say that cache will continue. New features, new capabilities generally going to be built on InterSystems Iris. Some may be backported to cache, stroke ensemble. However, that depends on the nature of the new feature and how easy it is to move it across. Increasingly, the two will diverge. One of the things that has happened with InterSystems Iris is that we have dropped a number of the old compatibility features which were sitting in cache. And if you are reliant on those, then you can continue to use cache and it will continue to be maintained and supported. However, a number of the new features that we're building out, so for example, sharding will not be backported into cache because we haven't, particularly in terms of building out, for example, the object, the new distributed object registry. That's a major rework of the fundamentals. That's definitely not going to be backportable to cache. So increasingly, you'll see the two products diverge as new features get added to InterSystems Iris, which cannot be backported to Cache. But some will be, as and where it's possible.
If I ask a supplementary, how about the other way around? Suppose for a cache client long term, how easy, how difficult is it to move that code onto Iris? If the cache classes and
very simple. If it's a class-based application, it should just be about a cache out, in effect a cache output, in terms of the effort to move it across. If it uses the Vism control, then that's going to be a bit more difficult because InterSystems Iris doesn't support the Vism control. So it depends a little bit on what your application does and how it works. So the effort to go there. John?
Can I ask about those benchmarks?
Yeah.
Wasn't it where you were saying returning 61 rows or 300 or whatever out? Was that out of, in the case of InterSystems Iris, returning out of 135 days worth of data,
Yes.
and the others were returning out of 14 days?
Yes.
So in terms of the number of records you were going through
10 times as much data.
and coming back faster.
Yes, exactly. On smaller amounts of kit.
Right.
So, and if you think that's compared with market leading, a market leading columnar database and a market leading extremely expensive in-memory database, I think that's quite impressive, and that's why we wanted to sort of, it's worth talking about. It's worth having a look at the white paper if you've not seen it. Anything else? Okay, thank you very much. In that case, I'll hand over to you.
If you have your questions, you can catch them later here.
I'll try not to run away too fast.
Yeah. Next presenter is John Murray. And actually, we are broadcasting worldwide in stuff, and we have 5 more online viewers. And actually, if you're curious about agenda, today's agenda, so it's available on the developer community. Just open community, the first post, agenda is there. So
It's on the mains part because when I was running some battery earlier on, he said, I think I'll switch myself off.
John is our next presenter, and the topic is development models and teams. John Murray is from George James Software. I hope you guys know this company. So if you have any questions to me now, so I'm open. Thanks for coming, by the way, and actually you are very welcome to be presenters for our next meetups. I hope we will have the next one in autumn. Okay, very fast setup. So John, I'm ready. Let's go. Advertising.
Okay. So thank you very much, Evgeny. Yes, I'm John Murray from George James Software. My official title there is Senior Product Engineer. But we're a small company, so titles don't really mean all that much. I'm pleased to be here. I spoke at the similar event last year, and I'm also pleased to see that we're in a sort of round table format rather than serried ranks here. I offered this as a topic for a slot here, primarily because a lot of what I do at George James Software is associated with our source code management product, and originally called VCM, now called Deltangi, and that product implementation and support of that product means that I get to see quite a lot of different development environments, some of them in the healthcare sector, some of them in financial sector, some of them in other areas where InterSystems technology has embedded itself over the decades. I've been with George Shane Software for nearly 20 years. We're not a fast turnover company in that regard. So I've also seen got some kind of sense of how development teams and development processes have changed over the years, over the decades. When I came to putting something together for this session, I at first thought I'll do lots of slides and demonstrate stuff and all the rest of it, but I also subsequently thought it would be, since what we're talking about here is development community meetup, it would be preferable if I were entirely at the other side of the lectern. A session like this, I would like some community interaction and participation. I realise that may present a problem for the videoing of this and the presentation of it afterwards, because a lot of the activity and the input I hope will be coming out from the floor. But hey, that's we can live with that. I have put some slides together, and the intention is not to spend all the time on the slides, so I may go through these relatively quickly, and then I'd like, even as we go along, to start engaging all of you, or at least some of you, with the process. As often when I'm preparing these, I've got my title, and then I do a little bit of thinking around, looking around to get some extra stimulation. I came across this cartoon. You may well have seen it before, and there's actually a website where you can build your own versions of it if the version that you find isn't quite appropriate for your environment. But I thought I'd put one of these in because the topic is not entirely about just the development team, not just about the guys who are working on the keyboard. It's also about the whole development process, and thinking about that as a team thing I think can be helpful for us. Of course, we're probably all reasonably familiar with the idea of the software development life cycle. There are various representations of it, variations of it, but essentially there's some kind of requirement for your software. There's some kind of analysis of that requirement, so let's work out what the significant aspects of perhaps a fairly nebulously expressed "we need a new system" kind of requirement. Then some design element of that, some implementation, some testing of it, and then it does become a life cycle in the sense that if you've successfully implemented, tested, and deployed something, after a while people will say, that's nice, but can we have it do this, and so on. One of my reflections about that is that when it's presented as though you are only ever at one point on that cycle, a bit like the hands on a clock face. The practical reality of it is that your clock has got many hands on it, and while some bit of what's going on is in the requirements analysis phase, other bits are being implemented, something else is being tested, and somehow you're trying to, it's like this idea of rebuilding something while it's still on the move. Static diagrams like that have to be, in my view, taken a little bit lightly, because the reality is that things are typically a lot more complicated. My thinking at that point then, I identified a few M words that I thought might be appropriate to put up on the screen here. For some of you that may have more resonance than others. The first M word I came up with was methods. And in this context, methods are really that we devise ways of doing things, doing stuff, whether it's to do with software development or I don't know, going around the supermarket or any of the practical tasks that we have to do in our day-to-day life. We devise ways, methods of doing things. So really, these are our processes. Then my next M word at this point is models. After we've been doing stuff for a while, sometimes, maybe not often enough, step back a bit from doing the stuff to compare, contrast, classify the different ways in which we do stuff, or compare the way I do stuff with the way you do stuff, somehow kind of abstracting from us, from our methods, something a little bit more abstract. And then we have, from that, we've got some kind of sense of a model. I remember the title I came up with, a fairly short, well, it wasn't short notice, I just didn't give it a whole load of thought before coming up with the title. It was about development models for teams. So the M word that I got into my title was models. So these really are our process models. So our processes are the ones we're actually doing, and our models of what we're actually doing are a little bit more abstract than what we're executing. Then the words get longer, as often is the way, and my next end word is methodologies. Having produced these process models, we tend to do a lot more formalization of these things. We write documents about them. We perhaps create courses. Maybe we even copyright the terminology and publish manuals that we charge a lot of money to sell them. Or perhaps it's a bit more free and open source kind of attitude. We just evangelize about them and say, this is how we do things, and we think it's so great. Perhaps you want to do it the same way. So somehow methodologies come in onto it here. And then if we haven't satisfied ourselves enough at this level, we come up with this fourth one, which is the meta models. The people who have created models about how we do things then come up with generic concepts about the building blocks for methodologies and methods, and these then become meta models, and then expect at some point someone will produce the meta models that will then classify the different ways of meta modeling the models that we're doing. So we have to stop at some point and get back to actually doing the day job. But this is an area of the business referred to as meta process modeling. So that's some of the M words that I wanted to bring along and offer here. So development models. I don't want to go through, not intending to go through a whole series of them in a whole load of detail. I'm not an expert on this. I've worked in software for a very long time, but I wouldn't say that I've been bounced around from lots of different types of software development methodologies. I certainly haven't done any formal qualifications in them. The last formal software qualification I did was my computer science degree, more than 30 years ago. Things have moved on in that respect. But the waterfall model term that we've seen, here's a little picture of it. Requirements, the 5 elements that we perhaps remember from this development lifecycle picture, that they do the requirements, do the design, do the implementation, do the verification, fall through into the maintenance area. And of course, that's suitable for certain types of projects and less suitable for other ones. There's another model methodology which is referred to as V-shaped, and I guess maybe I hadn't read around enough until I came across this diagram, which helped me understand why it's called V-shaped. In a way, it's like an evolution of the waterfall model, except in this case, the water having flowed downhill for a while, decides that it'll go up the other way. But the thing I liked about this diagram was that it starts to introduce this idea that something you're doing at this stage is going to be relevant further down in the life cycle. Plus, the idea that further down in the life cycle, something you do starts becoming connected to something higher up. So there's here, there's some sort of feedback loops or feed forward loops going on at various different levels within it. And of course, even with this, if it feels like you start at the top end of the V, work your way all the way through to the end, and then you finish, that's only applicable for certain kinds of projects. Other kinds of projects, no sooner have you got to the maintenance stage than they start to plan version 2 or version 2019.1 or whatever. The other one I thought would be worth putting up a diagram for is one that's, I suppose, is a lot more in vogue now, and I think with good justification. Software development is an evolving trade, science, industry, whatever you discipline, I suppose, and so the way we used to do things when I was at university isn't necessarily the right way to be doing things now. The agile methodology, and of course there are many different ways in which agile gets made concrete. Here's a diagram that I picked up, which I thought illustrated the extent to which things move forward, but also things go round on fairly rapid cycles. And part of the goal of agile is not to get too stuck in your ways, not to feel that you're it's moving too ponderously. It's like a kind of dinosaur methodology, really. Agile has given birth in some ways to DevOps, in the sense that what's been going on in software development, that left-hand circle, has spilled over, has been taken up by the operations side and operations aspects of running things on computers has over time started to learn to become more agile, I would say, about what it takes to deploy systems, manage systems, change systems, keep a track of what you're doing with them. But the key thing that I think this diagram illustrates is that, the mere title DevOps is a concatenation of development and operations, and it's putting those two disciplines, which in a sense had been rather separated out, saying we're putting them together, we're putting them so closely together that there's no space between them, saying we're putting them together, we're putting them so closely together that there's no space between them, and actually we're putting them so closely together that we lose some of the whole word development and we lose some of the whole word operations in combining them. This diagram is also interesting for me in that the overlap between development and QA, I haven't in other places seen that quite so illustrated, and whoever came up with the DevOps term decided not to try and concatenate QA into that. I suppose they think of development as being the whole of that top section maybe, but really the QA, this issue about overlap is quite significant, I think, because there have been times where QA was seen as something completely out there, development completely over there, and the idea that development and QA overlap and intersect and collaborate, work together, and now operations in there as well. Part of the kind of agility of software development as things moving forward is about having people work together as an effective team. So then I've got a slide here just about with some other sort of buzzwords on there, really as kind of stimulation discussion starters. Prototyping, the methodology is saying let's put something together that can act as a prototype, so people can poke around and see what it might look like. And possibly in the end they say, well, that's good enough, let's just have that one. You probably at that point say, no, maybe we need to do a little bit more engineering on it before we let you use it for real. Incremental development, build some of the system and then build a little bit more of the system. That kind of overlaps a bit with prototyping, overlaps a bit with agile. This idea that you don't necessarily have to have the whole thing spec'd out before you start building any of it. But there is a factor there that incremental development, there can be a tendency to go for the easy wins on it, and that you end up implementing the easy parts and never really getting to the thing that would make a significant difference. So there's a challenge there. Some people are enthusiastic about spiral development. I think we've got that kind of cycle idea, but with spiral development, it's like a hybrid really between incremental and the iterative stuff. To say we'll go around the cycle, we've built something small, and we'll go around the cycle. It's a bit like making a Swiss roll or something like that. You end up with a larger and larger piece of cake as you roll around the cycle several times. Other ones I put on here, test-driven development. There's a lot of activity over the last number of years in this idea that you build unit tests and you make sure that every time you develop or maintain or fix something, the unit tests get rerun and you pass the unit tests or at least validate against the unit tests. Alongside that, there's another one which is referred to as acceptance test-driven development. And the differentiator that I've seen described about that is, whereas test-driven development is kind of the tests are written by the developers, and they're quite small, and they're really there to help developers with the quality of their software. Acceptance test-driven development is more about saying, get those who need to accept the system involved in specifying what tests they will want the system to pass before they will accept the system. So acceptance testing driven, we purely think of as developers and making the community larger, more buy-in, if you like. Kind of related to that is something that's being referred to as behavior-driven development. Which really combines some of the TDD and some of the ATDD into it, to say some of what you're doing is going to be useful for making verifying that the software code changes that you're doing are actually being tested and passed at a fairly small level, fairly granular level, but also at a more abstract, user-focused, end-user-focused thing that you're actually specifying at that point. All of those things, test-driven, acceptance test-driven, behavior-driven development, strike me as being kind of related to something that you could call documentation-driven development. It hasn't really got off the ground enough to deserve itself a Wikipedia entry yet, but there are certainly organizations out there who evangelize about it and say you don't challenge your organization to document the code they write, you challenge the code documentation that you write. So start off by writing the user manual, and then when you know what the user manual says the system does, you then start coding up the system in order to fulfill the documentation. So another perspective on it, being driven by the documentation aspect. And of course, I'll put the 3 dots in there, there can be many more on here. So then this cartoon caught my eye. Methodologies, sometimes organizations can get very hung up about the methodologies. So if your manager wants you to go with Agile Waterfall Ninja, you need to pretend perhaps that there is such a methodology and at least pay lip service to it. In practice, you hope your team is using a methodology, small m, that actually lets them do the work well, deliver the product. Thinking about some of the relevant factors in terms of development models for teams and not just teams of the coders. Question about the size of the team. What's the experience of the team? What's the geography of the team? If you've got the team all sitting around in the same small office doing a little startup, that's a rather different prospect from having a geographically dispersed team, a team that's dispersed across time zones, and so the extent to which you actually overlap to collaborate will be different. What's the duration of the project? Some projects have are expected to take a long time, some are expected to take relatively short time, some actually conceptually have infinite duration. There is no notion that this project will ever finish in some sense. Let's go around the loop. There's always a next release. Also, the likely rate of change to requirements. If you think the requirements are going to change rapidly, then the way in which you operate could be significantly different from then the way in which you operate could be significantly different from if you believe you have evidence that the requirements are really pretty static. How long is the product likely expected to last? Of course, that's a bit hard to predict. You may expect it to last 5 years and actually get scrapped after 6 months, or you may have built it to last for 5 years and actually 25 years later, people are still getting value from it and enhancing it. What's the criticality of the project? Is it life critical? Is it life threatening if things go wrong, or is it just a bit inconvenient if the screen doesn't repaint in quite the right way? What kind of time pressures have we got on the delivery? Are people saying it's got to be out by a particular point, or is it a bit more relaxed? Overall, there's this drive to do things faster and faster. I think partly it's about the technology, the fact that we work with technology. We say this is really nice and fast, and then after a few months, you think, actually, why is my computer not as fast as it used to be? And it's probably just as fast as it used to be, but somehow it's never fast enough for us. There are some risks of going too slow in your development process, like your product is obsolete by the time it's ready, or there's a general loss of interest within the target business or the target market, or even amongst the development team. They kind of got lost interest in it because it's taking so long to get anything out of the door. That ties in with team disillusionment. You know, if you're going too slowly on something, it can be that people just get bored and get their CD out there and find something else that's more stimulating and lively. Overall, risk of going too slow, I would summarize as being a lack of momentum. And of course, momentum is not necessarily about going at a particular speed. Momentum is about how much size, how much mass the object has. So something that is very large and bulky, even moving relatively slowly, oil tanker kind of style, can have a lot of momentum. But of course, there are some risks about going too fast. The quality of what you're building can suffer. You can end up with something that's harder to maintain because you built it so fast. Harder to extend, so that's, you know, how long is the product likely to last. you may, if you're going too fast, you may just then embed current inefficient business practices rather than really innovating and improving on something. It's too much pressure to get something in there, so you say, let's just do it the way we've always done it. And if you go too fast, you may lose control on it. So that's kind of the flip side of not having enough, building up enough momentum. If you're driving too fast, you may end up losing control. A couple of slides I want to skip here because I think it's probably a little bit too technically specific. So I'll just put up my thank you slide. And this is the point at which I suggest we open up for questions and interaction between people here.
I'll come interact.
Just Peter.
Those who don't know me, I'm a sole developer. I have the most efficient team possible. Why? I have to spend time talking to myself and not sitting in long meetings with guys who can't understand what's going on or haven't got enough skills. So I'm very fortunate. But I find myself doing most of the things that someone has spoken about, talking to myself, evaluating myself, looking at what's the risk of doing this software, what's the plan, standing back from it and thinking for a week or so, planning ahead to get the design right, not do it too quickly. So even though I'm a team of one, I think John's points, I think you're brilliant. You brought it all together. So you summarise the different strands, the major strands, without going into too much detail. Thank you. I've stunned them.
Okay, I think that maybe this is outside of the scope of the presentation, but I think it's quite important. The tools you choose for do something or any of the tasks you are describing. So maybe you have some
tools as being something. If a tool is worthy of its name, it's doing something useful for you. If you're carrying something around in your toolbox that you're just carrying out around because it's a slot in your toolbox that it fits into, and you've never got it out of the toolbox, really, it probably shouldn't be thought of as a tool. So all of the aspects that we've talked about here, there are ways in which software tools or even low-tech tools like the Post-it notes up on the wall. I walked past an office in the City of London a few months ago, and 3-4 floors up, you can see the window is covered in coloured Post-it notes. And well, that's where they're doing their processing their backlog and keeping a track of what's going on there. So it's not a high-tech tool, but it's a mechanism for doing it. Yeah, tools. For the last 20 years, my main focus within DeepSee software is the tools side of it. And we produced a number of tools. We continue to produce a number of tools, but there are a number of great tools out there that just a question of getting in there and starting using it. Other thoughts, reflections, working in teams. Any folk here developing as part of a team? Or is everybody doing their own thing, or nobody actually doing any development? Ones who are developing are all out on the golf. No, sorry, not on the golf course. They're still up actually.
Thank you, John,
Okay.
for these sensible topics. Actually, you can ask your questions in person in our event at the Meetup. So thank you, John.
Thank you.
Our next presenter is Evgeny Shvarov, community manager. So as soon as I'm a community manager, I will speak about community tools, some community reports. Before I start, are you aware about developer communities?
Yep.
you are all the members. If not, I'm the person for you to know everything. Oops. Something wrong. Oh, now it's better. I think do you know how to do the sound? Sorry about that.
What?
Yeah. So my topic today is for how to make printing and mailing from DeepSee. Um, Actually, how many of you use DeepSee? Could you please raise your hand? Not very much. Yes. But anyway, so DeepSee is something you get with the InterSystems data platform. It's a BI tool, and you can make cubes, you make pivots and dashboards, so analytical solutions. And there is one need and problem. So when you have a outstanding DeepSee dashboard, you like it, but you want to print it, preferably in A4 paper. And what else you need? You need to send it to your customers every Monday with certain number of parameters and without any of your participants. Actually, I prefer interactive mode of communication. So if you have any questions just now, please ask me. So like make a dialogue, not a monologue. And we introduced a solution. Solution to make this happen. Of course, you need InterSystems data platform and DeepSee inside, and you need to install DeepSee Web, which is another community project. Speaking community, I mean that it is available for everyone on a GitHub. It's installable, and and it goes with free sources. So what it does, it renders your current DeepSee dashboards with Angular 1.5, and it uses JSON as a transport, so it's fast, it's comprehensive, and it may improve the performance of DeepSee dashboards. And to introduce the printing, you need to install this DSV reports module, which is available on GitHub as well. So what it is, it's a set of JavaScript libraries like Phantom.js, Rasterize, and a few templates. And after that, you will have the feature. So how it works? Basically, because of DeepSee Web, every dashboard, every DeepSee dashboard consists of widgets. And because of DeepSee Web, you are able to pick a widget you like and click on share, and you will have a iframe code which you are able to put on any HTML page you want. And you will get what you see with all filters, tweaks, and everything. So you will get what you already like. Yes. So the idea behind is, okay, if you need dedicated report in print mode, just pick pick the widgets from different dashboards you want, place it on an HTML page with divs, with iframes, put some static data you want, and then print this web page. And basically this is it. The trick is, okay, I don't want to print it manually for my customers. Yes, I want to send an email with PDF inside or in placed HTML page in an email, which is actually my report. So how to do that? Just to illustrate how it works. So you have DeepSee dashboards, then you create a standalone HTML5 with the widgets you like, and you will have the option of user interaction with that. And then we need this Phantom.js to generate and send PDFs via email. What is this Phantom.js? Phantom.js is a so-called headless browser. Yeah, it can run any web page in a silent mode programmatically. You just can call it, and then you can get a PDF or whatever from it. So it's common thing. It's not the only available solution in the internet. So there are a couple of them. So how to prepare this report? Actually, already described it, and the detail is that you need to, in the end, you will have kind of some index.html and some JS files, and just put it inside your installation of DeepSee Web to let DeepSee Web run it after that. So let's see a demo, real demo. Okay. So on developer community, we have analytics page, and if you click it, you will see a real-time working DeepSee web solution. So it's we are using DeepSee to track and analyze the activity of members on developer community, on the content and content consumption, content contribution, and it is done via DeepSee, and it is interactive. So what I did for our meeting, so I introduced a new dashboard, which is called Week. It contains dashboard 1, dashboard DeepSee week review, which consists of activity of members for a particular week. For example, if we pick now, so we have the view what's happening today. So we can click this, everything interactive. Okay, so let's create a report from that. So as I said, you can click or right click on a widget and click share, and you have an iframe code which you can paste into some index page and into some HTML. Okay, fine. Don't know why. Okay, suppose I already did this job, so I created this page. Yes, this index HTML, which consists of this is how it looks like. It's a bit more than one in-place iframe. It's like divs and something like that. But it's because it's just because we prepared this. I mean, for developer community we just introduced a prepared template. But you can run even with just very simple HTML. This template simplifies this import and copy and paste from DeepSee Web. And basically, you need to prepare this JSON, which consists of some descriptions about the widgets. For example, I want this for title, this widget, this is actually this iframe code we paste, and maybe you need some extra data like totals. This is like that. All this available on GitHub already. And so if you open this page, it shows this weekly results in this manner. And you can pass filter as a parameter. For example, show me the data 2 weeks ago. Yes. So and yes, I can click print, and I will have a PDF file. I can print this as a PDF already. Fine. So the next step is how to make it programmatic from task manager, standard task manager, for example. And here you need Phantom.js. So you call a Phantom.js, which is supplied with a rasterized JS, which is another JavaScript file which provides the description on how the PDF should be prepared, because it renders the content of the HTML on the PDF. As I said, Phantom.js is a headless browser. It can be found on phantom.js.org. And to perform it on the server, you need to install it. And actually, we already prepared rasterized JS. The only thing you need is just to set up the emailing thing. As you know, InterSystems Iris data platform can send emails, and Cache can send, so it's not a big deal. We let me show you the code. Okay, so yes. So we have this is the DSP report class. So it consists of email sender, and you set up. It has methods to set up emailing configuration, and the method task where you basically you provide the URL of the this HTML page you want to send and the topic. So I prepared. So I set up all the configuration, and actually we can test it interactively right now. So if anyone wants to participate in real demo, so provide your email, please. So we can put it here, and it will send the weekly report on your email in PDF. So if you're okay to share your private data, it's a big deal today. So actually, here is my way to share your private data. It's a big deal today. So actually, here is my
use the one I put on my previous slide.
no problem. So could you please?
Yeah, so that's John M. JOHNM.
John
M for Murray at georgejames.com.
And you'll be able to check the email after that.
If there's any signal.
Okay, so I added John as a recipient, and the next command is run. So it consists of URL and the name weekly report. So at the backend, it creates PDF file, puts it on a server, and then the next command just includes this PDF into email. So while John is checking his email books, so I'll show you what I do have. Yeah, so I just got it, and this weekly report PDF looks like that. So what I had in index page, I easily can have in email. So this is very, you have it.
Yes.
Oh, cool. There was no contract before. All is clear. Experiment, clear experiment. So if you want to try it, please. Basically, this is not a rocket science. It's nothing complex here. Everything is clear, but the problem is very frequent. So we need to. Sometimes we can say, okay, I want it regularly in PDF for my clients or in 1,000 recipients on Sundays, and I want to able to manage it easily. So this tool maybe could help you make this job. And one more thing, it's not something which is InterSystems supported by InterSystems. It's a community port. So you are very welcome to get it from our InterSystems developer community GitHub. We have this. It's easy to find it. GitHub.com InterSystems community. It's a set of repositories, more than 50, where the projects, the similar projects, which risk is yours. So please use it, but be aware that we do not support it, and all the risks are all the risks are yours. Along with code. Okay, do you have any questions about that?
I remember seeing DeepSee a few years ago. You saying it's not an InterSystems product, it doesn't integrate with cache and things like that?
No, I'm saying that to create dashboards for that, you need InterSystems DeepSee, and in InterSystems Analytics, we call it now. So you create queue, you create pivots, you create dashboards with DeepSee, and then you can use the DeepSee Web as a renderer for dashboards you already created with DeepSee and Iris Analytics.
It's another visualization option.
Only.
You know, I noticed that you were using it looks like Visual Studio or something. Is that right?
Actually, it's another community project which is called Visual Studio Code project, which is called Visual Studio Code plugin. Why I'm using this instead of Atelier, you may ask me. The reason is only that Atelier doesn't support very much DeepSee dashboards, and this plugin supports better. But actually, the support for DeepSee dashboards is in the roadmap of Atelier. So once it would be there, so
would be. I mean, can you actually do development cache of this with
would be there. So
would be. I mean, can you actually do development cache of this with
Yes, actually it's not development, so it supports highlighting.
Right.
It supports highlighting, and when you save, it compiles, and on this only that. But the tool is really handy if you need if you work with GitHub or whatever, so it shows what changes, so the changes, so it's really easy to commit. It's popular studio. And there is another, if you're interested, there is a separate topic on community. There are some people who support from community for free. So we but there is no debugger here. But there is no debugger here. No, the only two features: highlighting and compilation. So Atelier is much more professional, so it's supported and it is debugger, it's cross-platform. So no doubt, Atelier. Yeah. And you asked speaking about how. Okay, you see that picture. Where is DeepSee? Yes, actually you can press this one, and you see the dashboard which the source of this rendering. So you can alter something here, and the render will implement this visualization.
With your DeepSee web reports, you're giving it an iframe fragment, and it will render that with phantom.js, rasterize it, produce the PDF. So it's not really dependent upon only being used with DeepSee Web, is it? Or can you give it any page and say, email this page to?
Yeah. Basically, if you look into this share, yes, so it's iframe which looks into DeepSee Web. So I mean this part is this DSV, which means DeepSee Web. So you need DeepSee Web be installed on this server or on some server where you need to.
But if I copy that fragment there and change source equals and say I want to go to community.intersystems.com, will that render me the homepage of developer community?
No. So
what else are you doing? What are the dependencies on?
Maybe I didn't get your question. So, for example, here we have same thing, but on community online. Yes, everyone can open that and click here and get this iframe with the URL which goes to analytics community, blah blah blah.
When you created your report, the HTML for your report, you took that fragment and put it into the HTML.
Sure.
Does it have to be a fragment that you've got from that share link, or could it be any?
It can be anything.
So it's not. It could be your DeepSee web reports rendering of anything into PDF.
Yes, exactly.
It's not specifically about DeepSee pages.
Exactly. It's just yes, of course. This DeepSee web report thing. It's just the caller for this phantom JS, which is placed in this server. So it's a call for open operation system line. So for example, this is the URL, and URL can be somewhere. This is the URL. Just open that, render that, create, rasterize it into PDF, place it on somewhere, maybe on this server, and then send an email with this PDF attached. So what this project does, it's basically simplifies all these steps which you can do by yourself. But with DeepSee Web, you just install DeepSee Web, then install DeepSee reports, create the page, and install DeepSee reports, create the page, and go. Oh. Yeah.
Do you have anything yet to add that controls of background pass where you can send 50 copies of the email or 500 copies? Plus error checking and what happens if the email server fails, logging all the rest of that. Have to send the emails out.
No, it's a big it could be MailChimp, for example. So you know these guys, they are billionaires. I don't know. So it's just because they have mailing tool which sends mails, nothing else. Yeah, so it's maybe it's new business.
I actually ended up implementing my own kit in Payne. Some clients use MailChimp as well, just to be confusing.
Yeah, actually, out of curiosity, why nobody introduced a tool which loads all the emails in the database and maybe examines that with I know? Actually, I'm suffering, so I'm using Apple Mail, and it's damn slow. So
see the problem actually I'm working on right now for a client is they do membership renewals every month, and we have a now legal requirement to notify the member that we're going to take the money off them at the beginning of the month. So this software is going live next week, and basically each email is mail merge. Dear Mr. Cooper, we are going to take £30.50 off you on or around the 20th of June next month. Blah 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 blah. That sort of thing. So each email is different. I've done that, but now I want it to be automatically sent by a cache process. But all the error checking and error tracking. So if something goes wrong, it's logged. Or if one email out of 200 fails because there's a bad email address being typed in, it doesn't fail the whole queue. You have nothing like that yet.
We do not, but it's good task to solve. If you create it, use it as a tool in community, so make everybody know about that.
Okay. It's worth asking that.
So any more questions? David?
Yeah. I don't know a lot about the DeepSee web, but you are using all the authentication features of the cache.
Authentication?
DeepSee web, right?
Yes, it's a great question, by the way. I have a slide about that, how to deploy a solution.
Okay.
Yeah, so to deploy, you need DSW, then DSW report, and to call this for reporting. And actually, so the security is the same which you provide for DeepSee web app, which is the normal web app, CSP web app. So everything is secure, of course. So, because it utilizes supported ways of providing security. Nothing, no holes, nothing, no backdoors. So it's everything straightforward.
Yeah.
So my 3 takeaways. So thank you. And next. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Our next presenter, Sergei Shutov, developer from InterSystems, Australia. He develops tracking. All right? Please correct me. He came here from Australia to
make this event a special. All right. Actually, I just realized that my presentation extends quite nicely on the previous three speakers. So before I start, a little bit of introduction, because I don't, unfortunately, can't hear too often. In fact, this is my first time. So I spent 5 years at Dimas Limited. Can't hear too often. In fact, this is my first time. So I spent 5 years at Dimas Limited in Russia, facing some custom solution, mainly in transport industry for seaports, railroads, and public buses, trams. Then I moved about 10 years ago to InterSystems, Australia, to work on track care, which is, if you don't know, one of the world's biggest electronic patient medical record solution. And there I pretty much do work on frameworks, release engineering, and Angular, and on some medical stuff as well. I do a little bit of community involvement, participate in Russian events, symposiums in schools, on forums in Russian, and a little bit on developer community as well. I attend global summits for the last 7 years. I think I will go this year as well. So happy to meet many of you here if you will go. It's a great event. And we can talk about sailboats, hiking, diving, and travel during the our next step, which will be somebody here. So today we will cover the current development best practices, how to deploy private development instances, how to use Atelier with source control, how to use a build server and automated build class, unit tests, and we will actually demonstrate all this on the special widgets direct sample application. So where do we start? Pretty much almost standard position for all the starting projects, or even for some quite old and developed projects, is when you have one database system, especially it's true in some internal development environments for the systems that are only used internally in a company. So you have one cache server, and all the developers, QD engineers, and users use the same database, which is quite not ideal because they break each other work quite often. So we'll be pursuing the development best practices. This is kind of a ladder that extends on one another in terms of having the previous steps will help you highly to achieve the next step. So we start with writing code using Studio, Atelier, or something else, and we go to the source control, so we have a history of our code changes. And then we go to automated testing, which actually may be skipped, and I know a lot of people don't do any unit testing at all, but it helps with your release engineering and development process greatly. So then you automate installation, then you do continuous integration, and then you automate provisioning. So we will cover a little bit how to climb this ladder. So the final architecture of our project would be we will have separate development environments for each developer. We'll have one central source code repository. We'll have a build server, which uses source code to produce some final artifacts, which can then be fed back to developers or go to your test and live environments, which will be separate as well. Today we are not building the whole solution, because actually it's a topic for probably a day worth of a workshop. We'll build just this little bit without the deployment. So technologies in use, we'll use Iris Atelier, special installer and unit test tools that are built in Cache Iris as well. We'll use Jenkins second version with Payne and Docker plugins for continuous integration. We'll use Docker for containerization and Git with GitHub for source control processing. So how many of you actually try to use Atelier at all? Well, quite a few. Trick with Atelier is that in some ways it's very different from Studio, because in Studio all your data was actually stored here in the database. In Atelier, all your source code is stored in your local file system, and then it's synchronized with your source code repository and with your server. We will use Git, which is a distributed version control, pretty much standard nowadays for the source control system. But it works a little bit different to centralized source control systems. So with a centralized source control system, you have one central server, and everybody connects to the server, and you have all the history and all the pretty much source code database on this server centrally. In Git, you have the full copy of all the changes to this source control database on each individual developer's computer. So it doesn't require a central repository to work with source control at all. you use your local source control repository when you do your development, and once you finish, you push stuff to the central repository or pull it back from the central repository. And it doesn't have to be just one remote repository. There may be many, but usually people just use one central server. And we will use, so this stuff we will do today enables continuous integration, which again extends quite nicely from John's presentation. He was talking about different methodologies, and continuous integration allows us to use the agile methodologies. So do quick changes to our project without having to spend 1 month to build a new version every time we want to use it. Finally, we'll use Docker containers, which is, in terms of how you use it, it is quite similar to virtual machine. But the difference is, with a virtual machine, you have the whole copy of operation system and all the libraries and then your application on top of your infrastructure operation system. With containers, you don't have these layers. So you have a central operation system, and then you have different bundles of your applications, but it is a little bit lighter. So you don't have different operation system. And well, in some ways, it may not be so good because you can only run one operation system in Docker, which is Linux. So if your solution relies on Windows, you can't really use containers. But if you use Linux, it enables very nice virtualization technique without the virtualization overheads. So that was a little bit of theory, a little bit of introduction to what we are doing. My main thing I wanted to do a little bit of demonstration. So as I said before, we start with our application, which is developed on our local health share environment. So we have this local host 577. So it is running on my current health share. We have this application which just has a list of widgets. You can click on a widget and go into the widget details. You can change the order of things, do some filtering, etc. So we have, which is not Atelier at all. So to go to Atelier, you actually have to go to this window menu, go to show perspective, open perspective, go to other, and check Atelier here. So actually, I was going to make, let's see, the bigger so you can see that. Just, so now we have this thing, which I don't need at all, so I will delete it. Some temporary files and Atelier installation. And I will create a new project. I will new Atelier project. I will call it widgets direct have location by default. Okay, now I need to start server, so I go configure server, give it a name, health share, localhost, enter the password, test connection successful. Okay. That's my keychain password. Select a namespace, which in my case is just user, and finish. So now I have an empty project in Atelier. The next step would be to add some classes and a CSV files there, which is, again, quite straightforward. You just go to classes, copy them to projects, click finish, go to CSV files, copy them to project, So now I have Atelier project with my existing application. I can go open some files, for example, this REST, this page, and see my source code of my application. So now when I change something here, save it, it will be saved in my local file system, which is shown here, and then it will be sent to server, compiled there, and if I refresh this, and then it will be sent to server, compiled there, and if I refresh this, it will be my function server. So far so good. Actually, to work with Atelier, you don't need like source control system or anything at all. You can just use it in this way. But what I wanted to demonstrate is that it is really easy to connect your source code into the source control system with Atelier. All you need to do is right click here. Again, it's not very straightforward. You need to go to the team menu, go to share project, and create a repository here. I'm quite sure I don't have this directory in my working space here. Click finish. So now I have enabled source control for my project. If you will look closer, you can see there are these little question marks near each of class and CSV files. That means that my source control doesn't know what this file is. So it's not in source control and not marked as ignored in source control. So we're not sure what this is about. So now if I will go back, again, not very straightforward step. I need to go back to your window menu, go to open perspective again, go to open perspective again, go to other again, and here you need to choose deep. So when you do this, we will have two different perspectives in this right upper corner. So we can switch between Atelier and Git clients without going to a different ID. So you can switch between your code authoring and working with source code with just one button click. So here we have my Git repository, and there is a special Git staging tab. If I refresh this, I need to select this. So I select this repository first. Now I have all my files listed here. So those are unstaged changes. The files that were added. If I make it bigger again, so all the question mark files are listed here. So pretty much what I need to do now is select all these files, put them into the stage changes. So that means that I'm happy with all these changes. I don't have to submit all changes at once. I can just choose some files to submit. Enter some commit message. Initial commit. And I click commit. So now I have all my changes put into source control. And if I go back to my Atelier perspective and look at these icons, it is now this database icon, which means this file is now in source control. So far, everything is stored in my computer, but it is already within source control. So if I will go and edit something here, so for example, I want to add, instead of this here, I want to add current version. So I'll change it like this and save it. So now you can see that Atelier marked this file with this icon, which means there are some modifications which were not submitted to source control. I can go and check that I actually have this change applied. So now I'm Chef for Unix, Apple Mac 2017.1. This is the version we use for Objective development. And now if I go back to my Git, I see this in change files, go to stage files, write commit message, and I can move again. Let's change. All right. So now let's open it. So as I said so far, we're already working on my local. To work with different developers, we need some essential work in my local. To work with different developers, we need some essential where I will put my changes. The easiest way is just to go through GitHub and create a repository here. Or you can use GitLab, you can use some other solution that allows you to put your Git repositories in. So I'll just go and create a new repository. We just direct UK 18. So like this. It will be a public one. I click create. And my repository is created on the GitHub side, but it's currently empty. So I'll copy this address to my clipboard, go back into Eclipse, and to publish these changes to public repository, I need to add another remote repository here in the Git. So usually they are called origin. I'll call it origin as well. It already substituted everything from the clipboard to this dialog. So, and it already has my username and password that actually stores each chain. But you will have to enter your username and password into that box. So click finish here, click save and publish. It goes into the GitHub server. So okay, it pushed into Git UK 2018. So if I go back here, refresh this page, I can see that my widgets direct was pushed into GitHub, which is somewhere on the internet public repository. All right, so far so good, so good. Let's go to our next step. It is about using continuous integration and Docker. So to use those tools, we will need a little bit of additional setup, which is I actually have it here on my special secret folder. So we have these 5 files, which I will copy to my working directory here, which is Git UK 2018, which is direct. No, that's Git UK 2018. Here it is. Okay, so I pasted those files here. I refresh my working tree here. Okay, we're already there. So pretty much the main file that we use when we use Docker is this Docker file. It contains some instructions on how we should build our container. The first one is instruction from. So it tells which container we base our container on. I use internal Iris container, and there is a documentation how you can create your own. So I will not cover this today, but pretty much, if you follow the documentation, you can end up with your container like this yourself. So I have some arguments which I can pass to have different user and system passwords. by default it will be sys, and CSP system will have password at all. Then I define some environment variables so that I can easily change location of my data, install scripts, install files. And then there are some comments that instruct Docker how to build the Docker, which includes correct iris version. It may include stuff that we need to run DeepSee web email reports, so all the phantom files, all the Node.js. It is all pre-configured in this script. And then when you build a container, you know that every container has the same versions, the same dependencies, and pretty much you are sure that it will actually just run and work. You don't have to spend a lot of time configuring your development environment or your production environment. And actually, you can make sure that your production environment and development environment are the same if you're using containers. So the next bit is copying the iris key, so our license file, because it won't work without license file. And the trick with the license file is you probably don't want to add it into the source control, at least not to the public one. And then there is an installation script. So with the installation script, here we use the so-called build class, which is actually based on %installer. So we will quickly have a look at the installer class. It's here in the tilde build. It has this build manifest where you define, you can define new namespace, you can define new databases. So in this case, I have the application data in separate databases. I can define my CSP applications. So you see here that I have two. One will be to serve files, and one will be to serve REST requests. And then the last bit is just invoke system.ops.import div. So you will just load all the files from the source control into the database. So in this file, you describe how to create a working environment based on the source code. And in a Docker file, we use this class to go and build our environment. So actually, if we will go terminal now and run this thing in the terminal, git uk 2018 widgets direct. So I'll go and run build, which is actually just so this build sh is just a Docker command. Like this, so it's Docker build and then some parameters. Just a Docker command. Like this, so it's Docker build and then some parameters. So I run this, and I need a new version. I need to specify a version that I'm using. So in this case, it's version 6 because I already tried it several times as preparation. So here you can see that what happens is it uses this original iris box, then it runs some command inside the iris box. So it creates the databases, creates namespaces, creates all the global mappings, then it loads all my files, it compiles all my files, and then finally it's done. Takes like 20 seconds to build. In the version 12, the frankly is quite a simple version. But anyway, still it's very, very quick. So now that we know that it builds correctly, and well, theoretically we have a working copy of our system on this container. But what I want to show is how we can use Jenkins continuous integration server to run this process of mining. Again, quite simple. So here I have a clear install of Jenkins. I don't have anything, right? It's just a standard standard installation. So I will create a new project, widget direct UK 2018. and the project type will be a pipeline. Pipelines are cool because when you use pipeline type project, you can provide script from the source control management. So I'll go to Git, paste my, oops, let's go find my repository URL. So I paste my repository URL here. Another thing I need to change here is to point to the correct directory because it's inside the widgets directory, inside the root folder, and click save. And when I click the build now, if anything, nicely. Looks like I wrote widgets direct incorrect. Of course, we didn't submit our change. So we need to go back here to Git staging, refresh this thing, ignore iris key so that people don't have our precious iris key. And so I will just say continuous iteration. There are two buttons, commit and push. So you can commit to your local source control, or you can commit and automatically push to the central server. This is something that I will do at the moment. Okay. So now we have everything in that repository. Let's go back and try to build it again. Okay, well, let's look better. So if we will go back here and have a look what's happening, it checks out everything from the Git. It runs Docker build to build our system, creates all these global mappings, loads files, and the last bit stops cache, and well, it actually runs tests, which is something I will show at the next step. But we are running a little bit out of time, so it's nice that it already has tests, because I can show you how tests work. All right, so that's it. So we now have a system that can build a fully working environment, like a virtual machine, based on our source code. And to set it up from the legacy system into this new and wonderful way of working using Atelier and Iris took us like less than half an hour. Well, actually a little bit more. Half an hour and 1 minute. So the cool thing about this is that when you hire a new developer, all he needs to do is to check source out of source control, which I won't show at this time, and run the Docker build, Docker run, and they will have. So if I'll go back here, we'll do Docker run. Oops, caps lock. My Docker container version number 6. It says me, you can now point your browser to this URL. So I open this URL, and I have my application running on Iris for Unix in Ubuntu server LTS, which is the Docker environment, with all my changes in less than. Thank you.
Question.
Oh, yeah.
Couple of questions. I'm looking at it myself. Is it possible to lock in some way so that if one user can be working on a classifier at the same time?
Yeah, so because of
I know you ran out of time.
yeah, well, I hope no one complains so far. I had this slide with the Git. Yeah, I had it. So because of the way Git is organized, this sample server have no real idea what happens on each individual developer's machine. So this means that you can't really log anything, and you can't really have an access control in it. So everybody has access to it. It was done for open source development. So there are some restrictions that open source developers don't really care about, but corporate developers probably do. So for example, in InterSystems, we don't use Git, we use Perforce, which is actually Git was based on Perforce. So Perforce was developed a little bit later, but they don't have this distributed system. So on one server, so we can do the locking, we can restrict permissions, etc. But in Git, it's not possible.
But two people could do change the same software file.
Yeah,
and
so
do a merge.
yeah, so they will have to do
That's
that.
me. Okay, like two. I thought you were a one-person developer. I have
Well, you
clients
never
where
know. You
it's-
never know. Today you're one person, tomorrow you five. Any more questions? Yeah.
I thought it was really good actually. I just wondered, have you thought about doing? I mean, there's some really good tools out there for doing code quality control. And are there any plugins for InterSystems technology for code quality?
So there is this French guy who develops plugin for
Spanish guy.
Yeah.
So there are several tools in market about that kind of.
I'm pretty sure George James does.
Kashekor and John Jensen, of course. So what you mentioned is this is cache quality. So it's based on SonarQube. It's plugged into SonarQube.
Yeah.
And John James is doing everything on the systems platform, I believe. So it's homegrown.
And what about you talked earlier? Someone talked about TDD. Have you thought about BDD? How you can actually integrate that into your pipeline?
So at the moment, at InterSystems, we use automated unit tests. And we don't use automated like end-to-end tests, which you will usually use for BDD. It really depends on what kind of system you are building. If this is some kind of library or tool that doesn't have a lot of like browser interaction, user interaction, it's possible to do the BDD with completely automated like software platform unit tests. But usually for BDD, people actually use some kind of interface like type of tests which we don't do in InterSystems, so I can't really too much.
That's fine for delivering actual software, but what happens if the release in continuous development needs some data changing? You added a new index, so you need build indices or something.
Yeah. So that's actually another topic for one day.
Next meetup.
Yeah.
Are the files that you use, are they available anywhere?
Yes, so this thing is available at InterSystems GitHub. It's called Widgets Direct. It has all these files in there, but they're there for InterSystems Cache 2018, not for IRIS. I will probably publish this somewhere as well. For InterSystems Cache 2018, not for IRIS. I will probably publish this somewhere as well, but so stuff that uses the actual IRIS.
Yes, and there is an article related to this topic on community, and actually you can ask a question with this topic.
So
you mentioned Sergei, and he will answer.
It was quite obvious that you can't follow it step by step with this pace. So it was just for you to have a look, make sure that it's not actually very scary, and you can do it on your project. But there are a lot of little bits that you have to spend much more time figuring out.
When you loaded your
project your entire widgets direct into Atelier, that's fine because widgets direct is quite small. But the Atelier developers make it very clear that if your application is big, don't try and expect Atelier to ingest it as a single project, because Atelier performance goes through the floor if your Atelier project has too many classes in it. And some people, I imagine, are working in applications with hundreds or thousands of classes and tens or even hundreds of thousands of routines. And if you ask Atelier to load all of that in, you'll think this Atelier thing is no use, I have to throw it away. So you don't, that's not a necessary step for getting it into Git, but if you do it through Atelier to get your entire no use, I have to throw it away. So you don't, that's not a necessary step for getting it into Git, but if you do it through Atelier to get your entire code base into Git or into another source control system, be aware that Atelier's handling of projects doesn't like large projects.
I know that developers in the US are currently working with Atelier, with Osher, and the cache %cs classes as one project.
As a single Atelier project.
Well, for library, definitely a single Atelier project, yeah. But, well, it's not that big, so there are hundreds classes, not thousands. So I would say if you have hundreds of classes, it's totally okay to use Atelier. So if your project is comparable with what InterSystems has in %cs database, it will perform all right. If it's like Jackier, which is 5,000 classes, it may not be very. So actually, this is one way to use version control. There is another way which used the old studio hooks for source control.
Am I right in thinking there's some software on community to use Git and the studio hooks? I think
so.
there's a project there, isn't there?
There is some Git, Toto is good for
Well, there is.
for
Studio, yes, there are some community books, very popular.
So, and of course, yeah, I think we need to wrap up. So if you have more questions, I'm happy to discuss.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we have bad news that there are no more presenters. But the good news